Hello, fellow cinephiles, and welcome to another episode of Steve Reviews. I'm your host, Steve Sullivan. I am a writer and critic for FilmMonthly.com. Today we are going to add another to the list of Steve's favorites. One of my favorites that we've already taken a look at, which is probably my favorite film of all time, was Lawrence of Arabia from 1962. Now, I know that we're jumping off and starting on the highest of high notes with my absolute favorite, but that doesn't mean there aren't plenty of other movies that I can have on this list. And I'm starting out with one that from the moment I watched it and going on 33 years now, I can pop it in anytime and I know the lines, and it's just one that I have always enjoyed and always will. So today we're going to take a look at the 1985 comedy Fletch. Fletch, of course, stars Chevy Chase, and Chevy Chase started his popularity in 1975 when he was one of the original castmates on the very first season of NBC's Saturday Night Live. Of course, you know, the other members of the cast were John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, Garrett Morris, Jane Curtin, and Gilda Radner. So, you know, it's like a who's who of incredible, up-and-coming, talented young comedians. But Chevy just stood out amongst that first season. And he broke out huge and a little too huge. He had some agents from Hollywood kind of, you know, talking in his ear a little bit and convinced him that one season was enough and he was ready to jump on board to Hollywood. He got out to Hollywood, and early on, mixed reviews. He did a couple of movies with Goldie Hawn that were relatively successful and well received. He did a movie in 1980 called Oh Heavenly Dog, where he played a detective who was murdered, and his reincarnated spirit was placed in a dog played by Benji. So that one didn't exactly, send him to the stratosphere either. But 1980 and the entire decade of the 80s proved to be the huge decade, the huge career boost that Chevy was looking for. And that's because in 1980, he starred in Caddyshack, playing Ty Webb, who was an immaculately amazing golfer who barely had to try and succeeded. He was also incredibly hilarious, and that role, I think, shot him to get more leading roles. And we skip ahead to 1982, where he created what is arguably his most famous character, where he was Clark W. Griswold, a family man who was out to take his family on the ultimate vacation, where they would take a road trip from Chicago to Los Angeles to Wally World. The movie was a huge box office success, and Chevy's stardom was shooting through the roof. So far, the two movies I mentioned they're straight up comedies. They're absolutely just comedy films. So in 1985, he branched out a little bit. He still had the comedic chops, and he still had box office power because of his name, but in 1985, he did Fletch. And Fletch was an interesting movie because it was based on a series of novels by Gregory MacDonald, and the Fletch novels were mysteries. So to take what is primarily known strictly as a mystery and add some comedic elements to it and make it actually blend cohesively seemed like it was going to be kind of a tough thing to do. But it worked out brilliantly because Chevy Chase had so much talent, and they took some elements of the mystery and the old film noir of the 40s and 50s, combined it with, modern 80s touch and just the charm and comedy of Chevy Chase, and it was blended perfectly. Chevy was the perfect person for it. He knocked that Fletch character out, and he knocked me out. And the movie is ridiculously quotable. There are so many great lines from it, and it is peppered with wonderful character actors. Individuals where you may not remember their names, but you're like, hey, I've seen that guy in this, and oh, I recognize that guy from this. For instance, we have Dr. Joseph Dolan, a character in the movie that was portrayed by M. Emmett Walsh, who has been in an astoundingly amount of great movies. The first one was another one of my favorites, which I'm sure I'll be discussing in Steve's favorites at some point down the line. 1979's The Jerk. He was also in the Coen Brothers directorial debut, Blood Simple, and he was in Blade Runner. So I mean, right there, you have a murder mystery, you have an outright comedy, and you have a science fiction masterpiece. So he could blend in, and you put him in anything and he was going to shine. And that was M. Emmett Walsh. And now most people do not remember him as Dr. Dolan. They remember him by the moniker that Fletch gives him in the movie, because since he is a physician, Chevy is doing some investigating on, and to do so, he has to speak to this doctor and pretend like he has kidney problems. And of course, the doctor needs to check the kidneys, so he has a glove and some Vaseline to do some inspecting, and he is from that point on known as Dr. Jellyfinger. So, yeah, Dr. Jellyfinger, everybody. And then, of course, there's Police Chief Carlin. Police Chief Carlin is your prototypical underhanded dirty cop who is trying to bust a beach drug ring, maybe, and he is performed to all the over-the-top glory that you could imagine from Joe Don Baker. Once again, one of those names where I'm sure you're familiar with the name, but you're like, where have I heard that from? Well, if you're a fan of Mystery Science Theater 3000, then you will definitely know Joe Don Baker, because he's been on a number of their episodes, but the most memorable one was he was Mitchell in the movie Mitchell. So there's Joe Don Baker. I wouldn't say he was exactly funny in this movie, but this wasn't a strict comedy. It was mainly a comedy, but like I said, it had the film noir element, so you need somebody that's a little tough and hard-edged. And that was definitely Joe Don Baker. He was both of those to a T. And we also have Tim Matheson. Tim Matheson, who you probably remember most from Animal House. He plays Alan Stanwyck. And Alan Stanwyck is a key cog in this movie because of the fact that he sees Fletch on the beach, thinks he's just some bum or some drug addict, brings him back to his place and says, I want to pay you $50,000 to murder me. I have bone cancer, and I'm trying to get the life insurance and leave all the money I can to my wife, and if I commit suicide, it won't happen, so I need you to kill me and then head off to Rio and stay down there. Of course, since Stanwyck doesn't realize that who Fletch is, he made a terrible mistake. Because Fletch is Irwin M. Fletcher, a investigative reporter for the Los Angeles Times who goes by the name Jane Doe. Apparently, Mr. Stanwyck has never read the article, so he did not know who Fletch was. And Fletch, of course, goes into his offices to try to dig up as much as he can about Stanwyck. Of course, he finds out that Stanwyck is not ill at all, and eventually realizes what he is truly up to. And some of the other side characters that are come in briefly is there's the character of Larry. And what great character actor is Larry played by? Gina Davis. Because I know when you hear the name Larry, the first person that pops into your head is Gina Davis. But she is basically Fletch's version of his girl Friday, who is right alongside of him, and anytime he calls, she is right there to help out in any way, shape, or form. We also have Jim Swarthout. Jim Swarthout is played by let me go back. Jim Swarthout is a real estate agent in Utah, and Fletch is calling to try to find out some records because of a purchase done by Stanwyck. And so Swarthout is played by William Sanderson. The two roles that I think Sanderson are most known for is his portrayal of the character in Blade Runner of a gentleman who ages prematurely. So even though he's in his 20s, he looks like he's in his 50s. And outside of that, he was in the Bob Newhart show, where he played a character named Larry who had two brothers that were both named Daryl. So if the name kind of sounds familiar, that's where you probably heard it from. And then you have Fat Sam. Fat Sam is kind of the slovenly, overweight, lazy junkie who lives on the beach and is the one that gets all the drug shipments and pushes them out. He's played by George Wendt, who is most well known as playing Norm, the bar aficionado in the television show Cheers. And probably the one that surprised me the most, because when I first saw the movie, I didn't recognize him, which was kind of surprising. But you have Kenneth Mars, who plays Stanton Boyd, the owner of Boyd Aviation, whose daughter married Alan Stanwyck. Kenneth Mars is Inspector Kemp in Young Frankenstein, the gentleman with the over-the-top accent and the fake wooden arm. And here, it's hard to see because he's buttoned down and he's straight-laced, and I almost completely forgot that was him. I kept looking at him going, where did I recognize him from? So I did the same thing that a lot of people did. And yeah, he was in Young Frankenstein. So that shows you the skill level of a great character actor, is if they can just inhabit whatever character they're in and disappear into it. And I think Kenneth Mars did that in this. I mean, you're so used to him just being in like wild performances that to see him in something like this, to just pop out and go, hey, that's Kenneth Mars. And wow, for the short period he was there, I actually enjoyed his performance. A big part of this movie as well, since Fletch is an investigative performer or reporter, is he has to kind of skirt around, doesn't want people to know who he is. So to do his investigating, he takes on a number of personas and gives fake names in hopes that people are not familiar, because some of these are actually celebrity names or famous people for one way, shape, or form. So some of the aliases that he used, Ted Nugent, Arnold Babar, Igor Stravinsky, and Gordon Liddy. The two that I have left out are not of anybody famous, but are intriguing nonetheless. When he is trying to get some information out of Stanwyck's wife, he uses the name John Cocktoston and claims that it's Scotch-Romanian. Sure. I don't know if she bought it or if just the level of charm that Fletch exuded made her believe it is mind-boggling, because most people would look at that and go, that is the most fake thing I've ever heard. But the real alias that stood out was when he was talking to Stanton Boyd. The name he went by was Mr. Poon. And I will leave you with that and do with it what you will. But the overall, the convergence of all these wonderful character actors and just the wonderful comic timing and just the charm that Chevy Chase exuded in this role is what made Fletch for me. That and the soundtrack. Not just, like the score and the soundtrack. I own the soundtrack. Yeah, it's 33 years old. I can put that in anytime I hear it. It's like, it makes me smile because it makes me think of the movie. And that's something that, it is a wonderful thing to be able to accomplish. To be able to create music for a movie that when people hear it, they automatically think of the movie that it's associated with. And Harold Faltermeyer, who did the score, did just that. It is the music is so catchy, and even some of the songs, especially the song that you hear at the very beginning and the end. Pardon me for checking out my old school notes here. Is done by Stephanie Mills, and the song is called "Bit by Bit," and it's definitely a catchy song that, once again, it's like anytime you hear it, you will smile and you will think of this movie, and that is a very good thing. Overall, I would have to say that, it's not only one of my favorite films of all time, I would put it up there as one of the top comedies. I'm probably in the minority on this, and oh well, that's fine. I think it's hilarious. I think it's well crafted. I think it's well acted. It's just put together so incredibly well. It's not going to be looked upon as one of the top comedies ever. Oscar nominated, Oscar winning. Looked upon by the American Film Institute. But it's hilarious. It's always been hilarious. It always will be hilarious. I watched it shortly before filming this episode, and I was smiling and laughing, and I felt good all the way through. And at the end, it was one of those where I could almost just play it over again and continue and watch it. I could watch it over and over again. And to me, that is a good sign of any movie, is if it has that rewatchability. And Fletch, for me, is definitely one of those that is highly rewatchable. And as a matter of fact, after this, I could probably go home and put it on again. And I've recommended it to friends. I've watched it with friends. I will always watch it and always love it. So that is one of Steve's favorites from 1985, Fletch. So I want to thank you all for joining me once again on this episode of Steve Reviews. If you would like to see more of my work, you can head on over to filmmonthly.com. I have a number of articles that I've written over the years that you can check out over there. And while there, also take a look at some of the other works done by the many talented writers from across the country. It's a great website with a lot of good material, so check it out, filmmonthly.com. Also, if you like this little show that I put on, if you approve, if you find me entertaining whatsoever, and you'd like to help it continue and to grow, you can head on over to patreon.com/SteveReviews. You can become one of my patrons, get a nice little reward, and help this station continue to move forward. And I'd be very much appreciative if you did so. Also, if you are an avid podcast listener, you can check out Cadavercast. It is a podcast done by 6-year-old Alistair and his father Jeff, where they take a look at horror movies that are family friendly, that are adult and kid approved. Movies that you don't have to worry about giving your children nightmares at night. It's definitely worth a listen. Alistair, at 6 years old, is so incredibly smart, and he picks up on little things with these horror movies that veterans such as myself and his dad Jeff might have missed. And we've been watching the movies countless times over the years. So he's a smart kid, and he knows his stuff. So check out Cadavercast. And when you're finished there, look up Quote Unquote Guilty. Quote Unquote Guilty is a podcast done by Joe Ketchum, and it takes a look at what some people would consider guilty pleasures in all categories: movie, TV, comic books, music, food, just anything that somebody would consider a guilty pleasure. Joe and his wide array of guests sit down and take a look at and discuss all the guilty pleasure topics that you could possibly imagine. And they've done over 100 episodes, so if you're not familiar with the show yet, you got a lot of catching up to do, folks. So head on over to Quote Unquote Guilty and check them out too. It'd be well worth your time. So once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this little trip down memory lane to take a look at Fletch from 1985. Until we meet again, have a beautiful day and good journey.